Beep. Hello, good afternoon. Welcome to the Washington Institute Policy Forum on the Kurds versus the Iranian regime, inside Iran and regional implications. I'm Dr. Dave Pollock, the Bernstein Fellow here at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and I'm delighted to host this event and to welcome my two distinguished guests, both of Iranian Kurdish origin and both deeply involved in the politics and geopolitics of that people and the region. We have with us Mr. Abdullah Mohtadi, the leader of the Komala party of Iranian Kurdistan, and Ms. Shukriya Bradost, a PhD candidate here in the United States and an expert on the geopolitics of the Middle East and on the Kurdish issue inside Iran. And I am going to give them the floor in just a moment, but before I do, let me say just a word about how you can submit your questions to me and to our distinguished guests after our initial prepared remarks. The way to do that is, if you're on Zoom, use the chat function at the bottom of your screen, the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. If you are watching on live stream on YouTube or on our website, please email your questions to the following email address: policyforum@washingtoninstitute.org. That's policyforum@washingtoninstitute.org. And with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to our first distinguished speaker, Mr. Abdullah Mohtadi. The floor is yours, sir.
Thank you very much, David, for organizing and moderating this timely seminar, this timely meeting. It's about Iran, but from the Kurdish perspective. How the movement started. On the 17th of September, the movement started in Sakaz, the hometown of Mahsa Amini, who previous day, on the 16th, was beaten to death by the notorious morality police in Tehran. At the funeral, people chanted slogans against the regime, and for the first time, collectively threw away their hijabs, their compulsory hijabs. The same day, the movement spread to Sanandaj, historical and politically important city in the province of Kurdistan. Of course, Kurdistan is not just one province. There are 4 provinces, but anyway, that's another story. The day after, Cooperation Center of the Kurdish political parties, which is a coalition between Komala Party of Iranian Kurdistan and Democratic Party of Iranian Kurdistan, formed in 2017, called for a general strike and a mass protest movement, which was fully observed by dozens of cities in the Kurdish areas. Soon it spread to Tehran University and then to Tehran itself and all around the country. So this movement was sparked by Kurdistan. And then the main slogan of it, which defines the nature of the movement, Jin Jian Azadi, woman, life, freedom, it also originated from Kurdistan in its rich tradition of women fighters against the Iranian regime. But this Kurdistan also is and still is, was and still is the stronghold of this revolution. But Fortunately, the revolution or the movement, whatever you call it, many people prefer to call it a revolution in Iran, and there are reasons for that. This movement or this revolution, fortunately, is not confined to the boundaries of Kurdish areas. In fact, this is one of the main features of this revolution, that is, it has overcome ethnic boundaries, ethnic barriers, religious barriers, gender barriers, and even class barriers for the first time. So the solidarity among all Iranian people is unprecedented. And this is why we can call it, this is one of the reasons why we can call it a revolution. In 2000, we have had in the past huge protest movements, for example, the Green Movement in 2009. But that was confined mainly to Tehran and its educated young middle class. Kurds and other ethnic groups were suspicious of the intentions of the leaders of the movement at that time and didn't take part wholeheartedly. We also had 2019 movement, a protest, a violent protest, not a violent protest, a protest that then became violent because of the brutality of the police force in 2019 because of the sudden fuel price hikes. But this time it's not about a certain demand, it's about a fundamental change in the structure of the country. The Iranian regime tried to blame the Kurds for everything, for the unrest in Iran, and tried to persuade them, lure them into an armed conflict with the regime. But Kurds, and especially the Cooperation Center, wisely showed restraint. We didn't engage in any armed struggle because we wanted to give the civil, peaceful movement a chance, because this is the best way to bring about change in the country. For decades, Kurds have been portrayed by the Iranian regime as violent separatists. No more. Kurds, it took only a few days for the Kurds to be welcomed by Iranians, by people in Tehran, in Mashhad, in Isfahan, in Shiraz, as champions of freedom. People chanted, Kurdistan chashm o chiragh Iran. Kurdistan is the eye and the light of Iran. So the solidarity is fantastic. The question of leadership of this movement. As far as the Kurdistan, all 4 provinces and some adjacent areas are concerned, the leadership is there. Cooperation Center has provided a solid, good, legitimate, and credible leadership in Kurdish areas. But that is not the case in all of Iran. But in all of Iran, we have local leadership. We have a network of local activists, local leaders, field leaders who are connected, closely connected via social media and sometimes in person, and coordinating slogans, coordinating actions, coordinating calls all over Iran. So the The leadership on the ground is there. What is lacking is a leadership on a national scale in Iran. And that is something that we as Kurds are working on it. Other peoples are also working on it. And this time I'm more hopeful than ever that we can achieve this. What we want the United States to do. First, clear, unequivocal support for the movement. I hear some people say it hurts the movement. Even if it was true at some point, this is no longer true. This is no longer the case. I give you just one example. When the American football team beat Iran national team, people came out to the streets and celebrated their own national football team's defeat. This shows how deep the gap is between people and the regime, and how fake is the story that the Iranian people hate America. This is not the case. The second thing is, some people fear for the lives of activists when America supports them. We are ready to bear the consequences. Please meet us. Please meet the Kurdish opposition as well as the Iranian democratic opposition. This encourages the Iranian people in the fight for democracy and human rights. This will be a big boost of morale for the movement. And it also will be a message to the rank and file of the regime and the security forces, and encourages desertion. The second thing is, we are working, not just the Kurds, but I'm one of them. We are working on forming a united Iranian coalition. I'm not calling it a leadership. I'm more inclined to call it a delegation to convey the voice of this revolution and the voice of the Iranian people and in its different sections to the international community, to the United States and to Europe. Another message for the United States is, please do not give tens of billions of dollars to the butchers of people in Kurdistan, in Baluchistan, and in Tehran and other parts of Iran on the pretext of reviving the JCPOA. Engage with the people of Iran. Listen to their voices and respect their revolution. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Abdullah Mohtadi, leader of the Komala party of Iranian Kurdistan. And now I want to turn the floor over to you, Shukriya Bradost, and the floor is yours for about 10 minutes.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much for having us. And thank you for Washington Institute organizing this timely panel. Allow me to start my statement with telling you a story of a young girl in 2003 in Iranian Kurdistan. In 2003, a young girl at age 17 with her friends, they established a committee named Women in Life. And they work on the Kurdish cause in Iran. And this girl now is in front of you and talking about this revolution. Okay. That's the reason that for me is heartwarming. I can see after more than a decade, the same slogan that forced me to leave my country and live in exile. First, I escaped the Islamic regime to Iraqi Kurdistan, and I lived there. And even there, they didn't leave me alone. So they forced me even to leave the Kurdistan region of Iraq. So here I found myself in the US, and still the same power, same girl, after years working and standing against the Islamic regime. Why it's important? Because that committee, that work we did in that age, young age, we weren't alone. That revolution of the Kurdish women started year before what I did and my friends. And this goes back even in 1946 when the first time Kurds have a Kurdistan Republic in Mahabad. They established the first Kurdish government those days, and we had a Kurdish women union, and women joined the institution, political, social, and work life. Which shows you when we're talking about the woman revolution in Iran, or even Kurdish woman revolution in Iran, we're talking about the society that Kurdish women, because of the cultural, social cultural environment, they had the less conservative environment in Iran because they've been engaged in agricultural life because of economy that they engage with the Kurdish society. That's the reason we have a less conservative society, and that allowed us as a Kurdish woman to have a more active role in the revolution, and the women's right being part of the other part of our revolution. That's the reason when before we opening this panel, I was telling you, always introduce me as a woman. She knows about the geopolitics and security. I remember even during my master program, I had a professor. She was asking me, why you don't take class for the international human right? I told her, I'm a Kurd. I learned through my life experience that if I want to protect my people, I have to learn about the strategy, geopolitics, security. And that's the reason I started studying that subject. And going back to our panel today, which related what I said about it, Iranian people asking for a revolution against a regime which call itself a revolutionary regime, which is really important to consider that concept. What does revolutionary regimes mean? Which means we don't talk about a normal state that have a normal foreign policy or domestic policy. We're talking about the regime that still think itself as a revolutionary that want to change the world, change the Middle East countries, change the status quo that we have in the global stage. So that's the reason they call the regime supporter as a revolutionary people. You have a Rahbar Enqalabi, revolutionary supreme leader. So that's interesting when we're talking about the revolutionary movement right now, Iranians standing against this regime, because this regime never considered Iranians people as a people who deserve to use the wealth of this country for the better life, to have their own voice in the international stage. What we hear from this government or this regime is a clerk or the people who are trying to tell the world, this is our culture, this is our people. They want to change the world. They want to change the opinion of the Islamic people in the region. But the revolutionary movement in Iran, it shows us not just Middle East. I think it's the first in the history of the humanity. We're seeing a woman leading a revolution against a radical Islamic ideology, which is important, which is the reason we call it the Renaissance of the history of the Middle East. That's the reason I'm sure I don't want to talk more than 10 minutes. Let's go back to the second round about how this have an impact on the regional country and why we don't see that much support from other countries like Iranian rival, like Turkey, Saudi, or even Israel in supporting of that revolution, which I will talk in the second round. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You've given us, both of you, a lot to think about, and I'm expecting a lot of good questions from our large audience today. Before I open up the floor to those questions, I want to make a few remarks myself about something that I have studied most closely, which is not so much the situation inside Iran, but how it affects neighboring countries, how it affects Kurds in particular in neighboring countries, and what the Iranian regime is doing, not only against its own people inside Iran, but even across its borders, attacking in particular violently almost every day for the last 3 months, targets across the border of Iran, inside Iraqi Kurdistan, targeting, so they say, Iranian opposition groups based in that region, but in fact, killing and injuring civilians and local people, Iraqi Kurds, without discriminating among the targets of these Iranian missile and drone and artillery attacks. Why is it that the Iranian regime, faced with internal unrest, not just in Kurdish areas, but all across the country, why is it that it is focusing so much attention and energy and actually violating its own principles by attacking a neighboring country and attacking civilians inside that country? There are a couple of different theories about that. And I want to say that in my own considered opinion, neither of the two major theories is exactly right. There's one theory that Tehran is doing this in order simply to distract attention from the internal unrest inside its own country and blame it on foreign agents, especially on what they call foreign Kurdish separatists or terrorists in the language of the Iranian regime. I don't think that the Iranian regime actually believes its own propaganda about that, because I think they know that the Kurds inside Iraq, although sympathizing with their cousins in Iran, and the Kurdish political opposition parties inside Iraq are not actually engaged in reality in smuggling or arms deliveries or military action or any of the other forms of intervention inside Iran that the regime accuses them of. There is no evidence of that so far, at least, of which I am aware. So that theory that the Iranian regime is doing this simply in order to distract attention or because they believe that there's a real threat to their own stability, the stability of the regime inside Iran, seems very unconvincing. The revolution or the movement against the regime in Iran is not just a Kurdish thing, and it's not supported mostly from the outside, it's internal across the country. But I do think that the Iranian regime is worried enough about its own internal stability that it is trying more than just to distract and to deflect and to scapegoat and to blame. It is trying to prevent what it sees as a possible future coalition of internal and outside opponents of this regime. In much the same way, I have to recall that the Islamic regime in Tehran came to power in the first place more than 40 years ago. They're worried about it. And the fact that they are attacking across the border is a sign of how seriously worried the Iranian regime in Tehran is by this internal unrest. Now, I want to turn briefly to some evidence of how much the Iranian regime, and in particular the supreme leader, is intent on this campaign against the Kurds, not just inside Iran, but even in Iraq, across the border. On November 29th, Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader, met with the new prime minister of Iraq, Mohammad Shia al-Sudani. And Khamenei, responding to Sudani's claim that Iraq would not allow threats to Iran from Iraqi soil, Khamenei said as follows, according to the official transcript released by the Iranian government. Sadly, I'm quoting Khamenei, sadly, this is now happening. In other words, threats to Iran's regime stability. Sadly, this is now happening in some parts of Iraq, obviously referring to Iraqi Kurdistan. And the only solution is for Iraq's central government to extend its authority to those areas. Meaning that while ignoring the fact, in public at least, that Iran itself is attacking those areas week in and week out, Khamenei is demanding from the new Iraqi government that it provide security for Iran along its borders with Iraqi Kurdistan in the face of an imaginary threat from Kurdish political groups or Kurdish people inside Iraq. And Khamenei's threat was amplified in the regime mouthpiece, the newspaper Kayhan, the same day. And here again, I'm quoting. And you won't believe the violence, the virulence of this language used by this semi-official Iranian newspaper. This is the quote. Hence, this visit is an effective measure, the visit of the Iraqi prime minister to Tehran a few days ago. This visit is an effective measure, Kayhan says, in exterminating the separatist groups that lurk in Iraq. After this visit, we can expect the Iraqi government, along with Iran, to take more serious measures than ever before to disarm and chastise these cunning and opportunistic groups. Putting down these barbaric armed groups is another severe blow to America and the Zionist regime. This is Kayhan, the mouthpiece of the Iranian regime. And Mr. Mohtadi's political party of Iranian Kurdish opposition and others like it based inside Iraq across the border are the direct targets of this campaign of what the Iranian regime itself calls extermination. So, what is the response to all of this? And in particular, to the Iranian regime's attacks against Iraq? I'll be very brief here. The Baghdad government is inclined, I'm sorry to say, to cooperate to some extent at least with the Iranian regime, and certainly not to protect Iraqi Kurdistan against these Iranian attacks. And that reflects a balancing act, to be fair, that the Baghdad government feels it needs to maintain between Iran's great influence inside Iraq and Iraq's desire to remain, as much as possible at least, an independent sovereign country, but heavily under Iranian influence. The government of Iraqi Kurdistan, the KRG, Kurdistan Regional Government, based in Erbil, is caught in between its sympathy for fellow Kurds, its desire, likewise, to remain free of complete domination by Iran and its agents, on the one hand, and on the other hand, its weakness, its internal divisions, its lack of capacity to defend its own territory against these violent Iranian attacks, and its preoccupation with today, with economic crises, with internal political feuds between the two major parties that control Iraqi Kurdistan, the KDP, Kurdish Democratic Party, and the PUK, the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, and its continuing dependence on Baghdad for revenue and for external security. And so again, my own analysis suggests that it would be very difficult, even for the government of Iraqi Kurdistan, to actively protect even itself and the people on its own soil of Iranian Kurdish origin from these Iranian attacks. That leaves the United States as perhaps the only party that could provide some protection to Iraq, to Iraqi Kurdistan, and to innocent civilians in Iraqi Kurdistan in the face of these Iranian assaults across the border. And I would say that so far, I have yet to see, although I may not know some things that are going on perhaps behind the scenes, I have yet to see a serious American offer to do exactly that, either to the Iraqi government in Baghdad or to the Kurdistan regional government of Iraq in Erbil. I'm not sure that even if the United States made a serious offer to increase the defensive capability of those governments, those two governments against Iran, that they would accept an American offer of more support, because they worry, understandably, if that would be sufficient to protect themselves against a much stronger Iranian military force. But at least in my personal opinion, the offer should be made. And it should be coordinated between Erbil and Baghdad, not offered simply to one or the other, because in order to be effective, this would have to be done together in some kind of trilateral understanding between the United States, Kurdistan regional government, and the Iraqi government in Baghdad. And I hope in the future, in the near future, that in order to fulfill its rhetorical commitment to support the Iranian opposition and to protect our friends in Iraq, and particularly in Iraqi Kurdistan, that the American government will move in that direction. So with that, I'm going to conclude my remarks, and I'm going to turn to all of the questions and answers that appear on my screen. And let's see what we have. We have a question first from Michael Morgan, and it is as follows. With the expressed national leadership vacuum right now, and what the speaker has also expressed, that there are other organizations or factions all working to fill this national leadership vacuum, why should we not expect a similar outcome that we've seen in Iraq, Libya, or other places in the region? In other words, multiple warring sects or factions or militias or opposition groups fighting for control rather than a unified opposition to the regime in Tehran. Can I turn that question over to you, too?
Iran is different from Libya and Syria in many ways. Its history, its society is different. We have even under severe dictatorship, we have developed a civil society. And we have a solidarity that is not seen, that was not seen in Syria or in Libya or in probably other countries. In Iran now, in this movement, it's Shiite and Sunnis together. It's Kurds and Persians together. It's Baluchis and Azeris together. So we have, as I mentioned before, we have overcome the ethnic barriers. We have overcome the gender, the class barriers, the language barriers, the religion barriers. So I'm more optimistic, and I think there is no sign that we are going to have internal conflicts. I cannot deny it theoretically, but there are no signs that we are going towards an internal conflict. Quite the opposite is correct. We are going to converge together. The movements are converging, the oppositions are converging, are going together. So I'm more optimistic in Iran than other countries.
Thank you. Shukriya, would you like to?
Yeah, I want to answer the question. Before
Sure.
I'm going that question, I want to have adding some comment on your
Sure.
remark regarding the U.S. how they can help Kurds in Iraq. Let's remember there is an agreement between U.S. and Iraq when they withdraw from Iraq.
Okay.
The agreement is still working, and U.S. alleged to the promise to going to protect Iraq from the terrorist attacks.
Okay.
So how is going to work in this case? Because we know RGC in the terrorist list for the America. So let's remember there is agreement, and if
that's a very good point.
yeah, so if they want to attack, the attack being in the Komala's party, Kurdistan Democratic of Iran's party, and other parties they're located in the Iraqi Kurdistan, being attacked by RGC, terrorist group, and it's a U.S. responsibility to the agreement that they promised that they met in Iraq to do, and they protect Iraqi Kurdistan and Iraq from that attacks. And we know now they're trying to use the land forces, not just the air forces.
They're threatening.
They're threatening. And I I'm working on a paper. I'm trying to say why Kurds are the easiest target with the Iranian. In my paper, I'm explaining Iran has a 3 target to divert what's going on inside the country. It's Saudi Arabia, and Azerbaijan in north, and Kurds. Each case, when we evaluate what's going on, Kurds are the easiest one. Why? Because for the Saudi Arabia, if Iran want to attack Saudi, and we know Saudi send intelligence, sharing intelligence information with the White House that Iran is going to attack us, imminent attack. What happened? White House came with a really strong condemnation response, and they say we're going to respond if any attack happen. Why? Because there is an energy crisis we have in the world, and it's not 2019 with the Houthis attacking the Saudi and US saying just the simple condemnation. Now the Arab country is more united too. We know the relation between Qatar and Saudi and other country much better. And another part, which is a really deep argument with the Houthi situation after 6 months of the peace agreement, even these ceasefires ended. We didn't see any attack from Houthis and Saudi Arabia, which have another reason because Iran cannot support them, and Houthis care about their own interests too, which Iran started support these Houthis in 2011. That's why Saudi is not the target now. Let's go for the Republic of Azerbaijan, the north. For me, it's really wondering me when I've been here for years. I've been doing research in this north border between Azerbaijan and Iran. Now they are in really high tension between these two countries. They're attacking each other on the media, diplomatically, and militarily. There was military drill in Iran and Azerbaijan border in October. And just few days ago, it was the Azerbaijan and Turkey's military drill in the Iran border. And Azerbaijan, Aliyev publicly, he's attacking Iran's land and call it the soft Azerbaijan. And if Iran wanted to attack any enemy right now, they should be Azerbaijan, because it's publicly asking Iran, it's a part of their land that's going to be attacked. But why they don't attack Azerbaijan? I think because this Azerbaijan victory in the Second Nagorno-Karabakh war, and Azerbaijan's got support from Israel and Turkey, tells Iran, if you attack Azerbaijan, you will put yourself in the same situation that Putin put himself, attacking Ukraine. because they have I come
exactly,
not exactly, but in the case of
Right.
how it would have support,
Right.
and Iran already isolated itself. It doesn't have
Yeah.
anyone, not China, not Russia, with this situation going to help Iran.
Right.
So they increase the tension,
Okay.
but it's not going to happen any attack anytime soon.
Right.
So who are the easiest one?
Right.
Kurds.
I absolutely agree with what you just said. I was going to say that myself. It's in my notes, but I ran out of time. And I think that this is a very important point that you're making. That
Easy targets.
it's not just that the Kurds are an easy target. It's that nobody, no other country has come out strongly in support of their defense against Iran.
That's the part.
And has made a commitment to retaliate against Iran or to protect its friends against Iran if Iran attacks them. The way, as you said, that Turkey is doing for Azerbaijan and that the United States recently did for Saudi Arabia. Recently.
Yeah,
did for Saudi Arabia.
that's actually important argument.
And that I think reinforces my point that if the United States did come out strongly in favor of protecting and actually did something to show that it was committed to protecting Iraqi Kurdistan against Iranian threats, I think Iran would back off. I think they would be afraid
That's
to
exactly the
challenge
point.
that, especially given all of the internal unrest in Iran right now.
That's exactly the point. And I have another point to make. For the you talk about the Sudanese, the prime minister, Iraqi prime minister visiting Tehran.
Yeah.
He's the one Iran tried the best to bring him in power, which he's in power with a temporary. We know that it's not a stable power for the Iran-backed Shia groups.
Right.
Why? Because the revolutionary movement in Iran is already started in a different country in the region. Iraq is one of them.
Right.
Why? Because there is a change in the Middle East people's among the population. Young populations looking for different life. It's not just Iranian, it's Iraqi too. What we saw in Iraq in 2019 with the Tashrini's protest, asking Iran to don't involve in our internal affair. You have to, just leave our country alone. And these politicians in Iraq, they know that very well. And that's the reason during the last election in Iraq, you didn't see this Iran-backed Shia group like Maliki. He didn't use the Shia, like a Shia speech or Shia statement in his campaign for election. What he used was what they used. It was a nationalism. So the wave of the nationalism in the Middle East is increasing, and that's make Iran's less influencer in that countries. That's one of the reasons. And second reason, I agree with Mr. Mohtadi about the GCPOA and sending that all money to Islamic regime. One of the reasons we see Hezbollah agree to sign the agreement with the indirect agreement with Israel and the maritime in the Eastern Mediterranean Sea about the gas resources is because they don't get money. As Hassan Nasrallah said, as long as Iran has money, we have money. So as long as Iran doesn't have money, we don't have money here.
All right. I don't want to get too far afield but I think you're right. I think that's important. So let me turn to some more questions a lot more questions that are showing up. We have a question from Patrick Clausen, and it goes like this. What progress can you hope to achieve while the Islamic Republic remains in power? Is regime change a prerequisite for any progress?
I'm advised by some people in Washington that not to use the term regime change because it's toxic here.
Okay, fair enough.
But that's what Iranian people want. That's not my fault.
Okay.
I do not see the prospect of any real tangible change for the better in Iran while this regime is in power.
Okay. Okay.
A brief answer.
Okay. Good. Thank you. Shukriya.
When I define the Islamic regime as a revolutionary regime, that tells what is revolutionary regime looking for outside and inside the country. And if you change even one of these main goal of this regime, it will collapse already. So that's the reason, like in this compulsory hijab is one of these backbone of the regime's rule. So if they give up on that law or that rule, is already collapsing inside the structure. That's the reason I don't believe they're going to confess or to accept any kind of the demand that people asking for change. And when we say why the regime suppressing people inside and killing people outside of the country, that's why the concept of the revolutionary regime is trying to do. Iran as the regime cannot act like a normal government. So what they do, they trying to have one security issue inside of the country, one outside the country. Inside the country, for years, they tried to securitize Kurdish identity, Baluch identity, and these regions to always, whenever people asking for the normal human right, they say, oh, if you talk, the country will be separate.
You're a separatist.
You are separatist. And for the Tehran and other cities, they will tell you, oh, you're agent of the Israel and America. And when the outside, they're trying to find another enemy in the region.
Okay.
May I?
Sure, please.
They really believe or pretend, at least pretend to believe that they are appointed by God himself. And
yeah, but there's a pragmatic side
yes,
sometimes to the regime, isn't
there?
There
Are two elements.
Okay.
Misogyny and anti-Americanism.
That are so deep that they can't change.
They can't change.
Okay.
And these are the sources of many deficiencies in Iran.
Okay. Good. Thank you for that. I want to move on to another question this is from Jiar Rashid. This is interesting because it's a different angle. What will be the next steps to see as peaceful of a change in Iran as possible? How do you see the political transitions materializing? And what prospects are there for minority communities like Kurds and Baluch within Iran? In other words, can this revolution succeed in a peaceful way or not? And then what happens afterwards to Kurdish or Baluch or other minority rights in the country?
Actually, I can say for the first time, Iranians are united.
Okay.
And the number of the people who are united is larger than the government, because who's supporting this government is because of their own interests they found in this government. When we say you don't have to remove the sanction on Iranian right now, and you have to put IRGC in the terrorist list right now, not for US, for the Canada and the Europe countries. Why? Because IRGC controlling all sectors in this country, economy, everything you can consider for the normal individual seeking in Iran. So why is important? When they don't have the money and they don't have a disinterest in the government, they will leave this regime alone. That would be easiest way to how they can change the regime inside the country when they don't have that much IRGC support inside the country. So when I say we have a more united right now, that's make me to believe that we would not have that kind of the civil war inside the country. And it will make it easy transferring of the power. But it depends how long these military forces and IRG forces going to support the regime. And it's all depends on how much they're going to gain from the supporting that regime. If they don't gain what they're looking for, they're going to leave. And there is a report actually came out. It shows they're trying to find some countries to invest to take their money to. Interesting, the Venezuela, one of the countries that report came out, they're trying to send the money to the Venezuela. I was expecting they sent to the Russia or China, but it came up Venezuela, one of the interesting destination.
I saw that report. There are a lot of reports coming out and from all sides, and we have to be very careful, I
Definitely,
think,
definitely.
to evaluate the credibility of all these. There's a lot
Definitely.
of fake news from
But
all sides.
trust me, before
Yeah.
even this revolution started,
Yes.
we know the Iran's regime's people, they already take the money outside of the country. So it's nothing new, even if it's reported fake or true. We know the kids, the family living the luxury life. Yeah, in Dubai, in Canada, they have one of the best example actually.
Yes.
The drones that Iran sold to Russia.
Yes.
In Ukraine, when they found the material being used in this drone, where this material being shipped to the Iran from Canada,
Yeah, I know.
from the Germany, how from these fake or the IRGC related companies under different names. So that shows us they have a lot of money outside of Iran under different names and different companies' name. That how related to the IRGC we will see in the future with the documented.
Yeah, maybe so, but it doesn't show that they're prepared to defect to other countries if the regime becomes weak or poor. You see what I mean? They do have a presence in many other countries through all kinds of front companies and so on, and double agents and whatnot. And people are being arrested all the time for violating sanctions and for smuggling.
But one of the reasons Russia and after all the European put a sanction on the Russia,
yes,
Iranian official statement was, we can help Russia how to pass this sanction because we are well experienced now.
Right.
That tell us the story behind that all this money was.
That's right. They're in it together. Abdullah, would you like to comment on the question of whether the revolution can succeed in a peaceful way?
We're not injecting violence into this movement. We want to avoid violence, and we have restraint from retaliation.
Yeah.
But we cannot guarantee, because it's the regime that decides whether to concede peacefully to people's demands.
Right.
So I cannot guarantee it will remain more or less peaceful. It's not peaceful, it's violent, but the massacres have only taken place in Baluchistan, in Zahedan, and to some extent in Kurdistan.
Yes.
We have about 500 people killed, thousands wounded, more than 18,000 people arrested.
Yeah.
So it's not, we cannot call it a peaceful movement, but it can be more violent. But they have problems. It's not easy for them. There are signs that
for the regime
that there are signs among them that shows they have some doubts about how cruel and brutal they should act against their own people, because sons and daughters of many officials take part in the protests as well. And there is confusion among them about how best they can control the movement. So there are confusions, there are tensions among them, there are doubts among them. It's hard to tell whether it will turn into a completely violent one or not.
Okay.
David, I want to add something about the violence.
Sure.
We passed 80 days of this protest, of this revolution.
Yes.
The regime tried its best to turn this peaceful protest to the violation or to the civil war.
Right.
What they did, they used the war weapon, military weapon, tanks to attacking the civilians in the Kurdish region mostly, but it didn't turn to the civil war. I think the regime trying to do that, one of my argument I made when they attack in Kurdish region and killed 106 people directly with the military weapon.
Yeah.
Among 122 people being killed in Kurdish region. What they did, the plan was if we kill the Kurds, the civilian who are just empty hand protesting in the street, we will forcing the Iranian Kurdish party to engage.
Yeah.
And if they don't engage, the Iranian Kurds who are living in Kurdistan, they will criticize the political party like Komala, KDPI. So you're our political party and the most organized and the only the group that they have a weapon and the guerrillas. Why you're not protecting us? Which we hear that ways actually.
Yeah.
So in this case, what will happen? The Kurdish party will engage and they will come to protect. And when they engage, now we have a word that we want to unite the rest of the country in the behind of the Islamic regime and stand against that. So they try it, but after 80 years, this temporary regime haven't been successful.
Right. Yeah.
Yet.
Okay.
Everybody showed restraint, except the regime.
Right. All right. Thank you. I have two questions on my screen and only a few minutes. So with your permission, I'm going to take these two together. They're related, I think. One is about how can we overcome the U.S. concept of one Iraq. This is from Paul Davis, to help the Kurdish region. Baghdad is very close to Iran, but we can only get help to Erbil through Baghdad. Can we get help to the region without reversing that policy? Well, I guess maybe that's a question to me, since I'm the one who talked about Iraqi Kurdistan the most. And my short answer is I'm trying to be realistic, and I don't think there's any prospect of reversing the United States policy of one Iraq and of insisting that any support that we give to the Kurdistan regional government has to be coordinated with Baghdad. But what I do think is that there is some prospect of finding a way to, as I said in my remarks earlier, to work together with Erbil, with the Kurdistan regional government and Baghdad, the Iraqi federal government, in order to channel more American defensive, I emphasize defensive support to Iraq to resist these Iranian pressures and attacks on Iraqi soil. And the example that the analogy that came to my mind is the United States is right now, as we speak, it's not directly connected to Iran. I want to make that clear, but it is a Kurdish issue far away to the west in Syria. The United States right now is putting significant diplomatic and even physical, like troop presence, American troops, pressure on the government of Turkey, our own ally in NATO, not to attack anymore the Kurds in Syria. And if we are willing to do that on that front, where again, the Kurdistan regional government is getting it from both sides now, from Iran and from Turkey, east and west. If we are willing to restrain Turkey in its campaign against the Kurds, then it seems to me we should certainly be willing, more willing even, to restrain Iran in its campaign against the Kurds. But the issue here is, as I said before, not so much or not only will the US be willing to do this, but will Baghdad and Erbil be willing to accept American support? Because they don't trust us that much anymore. I understand that. And they know that they're weak.
Leave at any moment.
And they know that. And I understand that. And that's all the more reason, in my own view, for us to be very, very firm about this, the way we recently have become more firm about defending Saudi Arabia and other countries, other friends of ours in the region against Iran or other threats. So that's one question, and I hope I've tried to answer it. And now the last question is the U.S. supports, this is from Shimon Zibari, the U.S. supports the Iranian people's struggle for human rights, democracy, and freedom. So how can they help if the regime remains? In other words, I guess what this questioner is asking, it's almost an echo of a previous question. Is there any hope for any change, positive change in Iran that the United States can promote without going all the way toward what you said you don't want to say in those words, regime change? Let's call it a revolution, all right? Is there something that the United States can do that would be useful and constructive and in line with our values and our interests that might fall short of a complete confrontation with the Iranian regime?
We are not seeking confrontation by the United States with the Iranian regime.
Okay.
We are not seeking American boots on the ground, the
Okay.
tanks or airplanes or anything.
Right. Okay.
What we ask is political support for the
Okay.
movement.
Okay.
And answering that question, I would say all the hopes and efforts to make the Iranian regime change its behavior have till now been futile.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You cannot do the same and expect a
Okay.
different result.
Okay.
My answer would be just don't help regime.
Just don't help the regime. Okay. Uh-huh. Okay.
Why? Because
Uh-huh.
I suggest the policymaker in the DC just do your research and see how the Islamic regime is the reason, one of the reason the U.S. wasn't successful in Iraq,
Sure.
wasn't successful in the Afghanistan even,
Uh-huh.
and even why now Saudi Arabia getting closer to China.
Yeah, sure.
So all tells you, for example, that Saudi Arabia, because U.S. didn't have that much support for Saudi against Iran. That was one of the reasons they don't want to deal with the U.S. demands right now with energy demands. So that shows you don't know how to play your cards as a U.S. when you're a region, and you already left the region, and you're now trying to go back. If you want to go back, now we can see the policymaker trying to say, okay, we cannot leave that power vacuum in the region. You have to go back after we left with this with the scene in the Afghanistan's airport. If you want to go back, you have to deal with the enemy first. You have to change. I use that word, change of the regime is the only solution for Iranian and for Americans if they want to have a better policy in the region without any of these militia groups or with this country's problem. The country in the region, like Qatar, Saudi, other country, you can see their policy, the foreign policy is focusing on how they can develop the economy. And they feel this change among the change that I explained about how the society is being changed in the Middle East, mostly young people. This country trying to have a little bit of flexibility inside the country because they feel that wave is coming. So they don't want to be like Islamic regime. So that's the reason you can make deal easier with them the way you will deal with the Islamic regime that always calls you as an enemy. So the only way to do it is focusing on how we cannot help them to stay in the power and release the money, like what it happened in 2015. All this money went to the pocket of the militia groups.
Okay.
And we have created new Zainabiyun, Fatimiyun, even in after that of the money reaching to the Islamic regime.
All right. Thank you for that. I am impressed by the confidence that you have in the Iranian people. At the same time, I am not as confident myself that this movement, as worthy as it is, will be able to succeed in the face of the violent resistance that the regime will be willing, I think, to use against ordinary Iranians, whether Kurds or others, if these protests go on. And I would like to think, and I think there is a chance that it can succeed. I'm just not certain that it will. And therefore, we all have to start to think about what happens next if the regime overcomes this crisis, and it's a real crisis for them, I think, or if the protests go on and degenerate into violent confrontations, as we saw in some other countries in the region that go on for years without a definitive outcome. I certainly hope that that's not what we
There's
see.
always hope
But,
for change.
right. But I want to just thank you for a very thoughtful and interesting presentation and very candid, I think, answers to very pointed questions from our excellent audience today. We've gone over time, and so I'm going to have to call this forum to a close. But again, I want to thank our guests, Abdullah Mohtadi, the leader of the Komala Kurdistan, Iranian Kurdistan political party, and Shukriya Bradost, a geopolitical analyst and PhD candidate of Iranian Kurdish origin here in the United States, for joining us in person today. Delighted to have you here in person. I understand you had the opportunity, Mr. Mohtadi, to meet with some members of Congress on this trip and convey the message that you conveyed to us today as well in a more private setting, less influential, but more private. And I want to thank our audience for your attention and close this session. On behalf of the Washington Institute, I'm Dave Pollock. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave Pollock, and thank you, the Washington Institute.
Thank you. Thank you.